During the Daoguang reign of the Qing Dynasty, a squire in Guanzhong, Shaanxi, Xi'an area, died of old age and illness. His descendants all lived in the mourning hall and kept vigil around his coffin. At noon the next day, a middle-aged Taoist priest in gray clothes passed by his house and suddenly stopped and sighed at the door. The servant guarding the door felt very strange, so he went up to him and asked, "Why are you sighing?" The Taoist priest frowned and said to him, "Go and tell your master that a disaster is about to happen." The servant was shocked when he heard it. He did not dare to neglect it and immediately went in to tell the squire's sons about it. The sons were also very surprised after hearing it, so they went out to see it together. When the Taoist priest saw his sons coming out, he went up to him and bowed and said, "I passed by your house and suddenly saw a bad omen. In my opinion, the body in the coffin in your mourning hall has become a foreign object and is no longer your father. Because your whole family is kind, I can't bear to see it being harmed by it, so I dare not tell you." The sons were very angry after hearing what the Taoist said. They thought that the Taoist was just exaggerating to cheat some money and even said that their father had turned into a monster. Two of the bad-tempered ones were ready to punch and kick him while cursing. Seeing this, the Taoist showed no fear and said to them calmly, "I knew you would not believe it. So you can go to the coffin and take a look. If what I said is true, there should be a small round hole at the front of the coffin. This is the way for the monster to enter. If not, I am willing to accept the punishment and let you do whatever you want without any complaints." The sons seemed to hear what he said seriously. They looked at each other for a while, not knowing whether it was true or not. After discussing with each other, they sent the youngest son to check. When the youngest son returned to the coffin and saw a small hole the size of a copper coin appeared on the front middle of the wooden board, exactly as the Taoist said. When the old father was carried to the coffin was obviously intact. However, they didn't know when the hole appeared overnight, and they didn't even notice it. He was very surprised, so he hurried out to tell his brothers. After hearing it, the other sons outside were shocked and hurried back to the mourning hall to check. It turned out to be consistent with what his brother said. Several people couldn't help but look confused and stunned for a long time, and then remembered what the Taoist said, so they quickly asked the servants to invite the Taoist in. When the Taoist came in and sat down in the hall, the sons respectfully served tea and water, and then asked the Taoist master what was going on with fear and trepidation. The Taoist slowly said, "Tomorrow at 12 o'clock this thing will come out of the coffin. Although it has transformed into the appearance of your father, it is actually no longer your father. He will call the names of all the close people, but none of you must agree, otherwise you will definitely die." Remember after hearing this, the sons felt that this was too absurd, so they still had some doubts on their faces. Seeing them like this, the Taoist priest stood up and bowed to say goodbye without saying much. Before leaving, he told them that if they needed to, they could find him in the Taoist temple outside the city. After the Taoist priest left, the few people discussed with each other. Although this matter seemed absurd, just in case they should let the whole family, except the children, stay in the mourning hall to guard the body. As the saying goes, there is courage in numbers. In addition, the servants were asked to prepare more sticks, swords and guns. Then they would wait and see what would happen. If it was really as the Taoist priest said, everyone could still take care of each other. So they ordered all the servants to prepare various household items and stay in the mourning hall. At the second watch of the night, there was a sudden lightning and thunder in the sky and a strong wind. Everyone was very scared and did not dare to sleep peacefully. They lit candles and guarded the mourning hall. When the midnight was approaching, everyone began to feel uneasy. The sons looked at each other and did not know whether what the Taoist priest said was true. At this time several people suddenly heard a rustling sound coming from the coffin, which sounded like the sound of clothes rubbing against each other, followed by a slight knocking sound, as if something in the coffin was about to break out of the coffin. Everyone looked pale and terrified, and shouted like birds and beasts, running away and hiding. In an instant the mourning hall was empty. There was no one left. Several servants ran slowly and had to hide under the pillars at the door of the mourning hall and pretended to be dead. Then they heard the sound of the coffin lid falling. The two brave servants opened their eyes slightly and secretly looked out of the corner of their eyes. They saw that under the flickering candlelight in the mourning hall, a person had sat up from the coffin. At this time a flash of lightning happened to pass through the mourning hall, and it was instantly as bright as day. With the light of this lightning, they looked carefully and found that the person in the coffin was their deceased master. He was still wearing the clothes he wore when he was buried, and his wide sleeves fluttered in the wind. He looked pale, his eyes rolled back, and there was no expression on his face. Seeing this scene, one servant was so frightened that he fainted immediately. Another brave servant was also shaking like a sieve and dared not move. The master slowly sat up from the coffin, first slowly turned his head to carefully scan the entire mourning hall, then he stood up and walked out slowly. Then he went straight into the room where he lived before his death and sat in the silk curtain on the bed without moving. When everyone was scared to death, suddenly a shrill voice came from the bedroom. Everyone listened carefully, and it seemed to be the name of the eldest son. Fortunately, the Taoist priest had warned everyone to hide in their rooms and hold their breath. No one was left out. Fortunately, all the children were sent away in advance. The rest of the people were warned by the Taoist priest. At this time everyone was dizzy and scared. No one made a sound. After a while, I only heard that shrill voice calling out the servants' names again, from Zhang San to Li Si and all the way to Wang Wu. At that time there was a servant who did rough work in the family. He was rather stupid and muddled all day. When his name was called, he was sleeping in a daze. Suddenly, he heard the master calling his name and answered involuntarily. When he heard someone answering, the whole house suddenly became quiet. The master did not call out for anyone anymore. After half an incense stick of time, he suddenly got off the bed and slowly walked back to the mourning hall. He glanced around and still got into the coffin and lay down. At this time, the candles in the mourning hall had been blown out for the most part. The faint candlelight illuminated the dark coffin and the empty mourning hall. The whole house was dead silent. There was only the sound of a violent storm coming from outside. Everyone held their breath and did not move. In my heart, I just felt that this dark night was too long. I was looking forward to the dawn. When the cock crowed 3 times at dawn the next day, and it was already bright, a group of frightened people came out from their rooms, under the bed, in front of the cabinet, and in front of the pillar. At this time the rain stopped and the clouds cleared. The sun was rising. A group of people, led by several sons, stood at the door of the mourning hall with sticks and watched. After a period of inspection, several people finally bravely moved into the mourning hall step by step. They saw that the coffin was still the coffin, still parked in the middle. But no one dared to go forward to see what kind of monster was lying inside. When they were panicking, suddenly a servant ran to report to the sons in panic. "It's bad, someone died." Upon hearing this, the whole family was shocked and hurriedly left the mourning room and followed the servant to a room. This room was where the stupid and vulgar servant slept. Everyone went in and took a look. They couldn't help but take a breath. They saw that the servant's face was hideous and his eyes were wide open. His whole body was stiff and he had been dead for a long time. Everyone felt a chill down their spines. An inexplicable fear enveloped everyone's heart. At this time, the sons were terrified and suddenly remembered the words of the Taoist priest before he left. So they quickly sent people to the Taoist temple outside the city to invite him. After about an hour, the Taoist priest was finally invited. At this time, the whole village knew about this matter and came to this house to watch the fun. When the Taoist priest saw the sons, he said, "Do you still believe that this is your father? The servant who died last night was just the beginning. If this evil spirit is not subdued, it will probably bring disaster to the people in this area." The sons were both afraid and hesitant when they heard this. The most important thing in ancient Chinese culture is filial piety. And among the various behavioral principles related to filial piety, keeping the body intact is given a mysterious color and is regarded as the most basic starting point of filial piety. For example, the Book of Filial Piety, which was later regarded as a Confucian classic, clearly pointed out, "The body and hair are given by parents. I dare not damage them." This is the beginning of filial piety. Children and grandchildren must pay attention to protecting their bodies at all times. This is the most basic filial piety. Of course, for the deceased fathers and grandfathers, they must be extra careful to keep the remains intact. Otherwise, it would be a great disobedience and treason, not to mention destroying them. Those who burn the body will be sentenced to 3 years in prison. If it is the body of a senior relative, the crime will be increased. Those who burn the coffin will be exiled for 3,000 miles. Those who burn the body of a senior relative will be exiled for 3,000 miles. The sons were sentenced to death by hanging. These regulations were basically followed by the Song, Yuan, Ming and Qing dynasties, so the sons were a little embarrassed. However, when the neighbors heard that the disaster was coming, they were terrified and asked the Taoist priest to quickly subdue the evildoer. In this situation, it was difficult to offend the public anger. The sons had no choice but to agree to the Taoist priest's request to exorcise the evildoer. The Taoist priest then said to them, "Tonight, everyone should go out and leave only 4 brave and strong young men to be my assistants." So everyone recommended 4 young men who were recognized as quite courageous in the neighborhood to follow the Taoist priest with sticks. When it was almost midnight that night, the Taoist priest stood in the yard with a black sword on his back, looked around and entered a room with a window facing east. This room was just opposite the mourning hall. He then ordered the 4 young men to come in and stand in the 4 corners of the room with weapons, and then lit an oil lamp in the middle of the bedroom and pasted the talisman he had drawn on the door. He sat cross-legged, looked at his nose with his eyes and his heart with his nose, and began to chant and meditate. The 4 young men also perked up their spirits and dared not neglect it. Just after midnight, there was a rustling sound from the coffin. The owner came out again like the night before. But tonight, when the creature just left the mourning hall, he suddenly saw the talisman posted under the eaves of the opposite house. His whole body trembled as if he was very surprised. He stood in the yard for a moment, and suddenly ran straight to this house. But when he reached the door, he saw the talisman posted on the door, but it was circling outside the door several times, as if hesitating. After a while, a shrill sound came again. After listening carefully, this time it was full of dirty words and cursed the Taoist priest. However, no matter how the creature cursed, the Taoist priest in the house turned a deaf ear and was unmoved. He just chanted a little louder. The 4 young men were even more angry and dared not utter a word. The hands holding the sticks were shaking. They were deadlocked until the sky was faintly white. The monster seemed to be more agitated and tried to rush in several times. But it seemed to be afraid of the talisman at the door, so it often walked to the door and then retreated. At this time the Taoist priest suddenly opened his eyes, stood up and shouted, "Monster, why don't you come in and die?" This creature was already extremely impatient. When it heard the Taoist priest's words, it was furious and could no longer hold back. It rushed in from the door. The Taoist priest drew out the black sword on his back, picked up a talisman and stabbed it with the sword. The talismans at the door also burned at the same time. In the blink of an eye, the monster had fallen to the ground and was motionless. Although the 4 young men who were known for their courage did not faint, they were already shaking and weak, and they could not take a step for a long time. Seeing this, the Taoist priest shouted at them, "Hurry up and open the window." A young man near the window quickly pushed the window open to let the rising sun Indiana. The Taoist priest took out a 3-inch mirror and reflected the light onto the body. The 4 young men then came up tremblingly and held down the body with sticks for fear that it would jump up again. The Taoist priest took out a black rope from his arms and gave it to the 4 young men to tie up the body tightly. It was already bright at this time. All the people nearby got up. They rushed here to see what was going on. As a result, when they entered the door, they found the body tied up on the ground and motionless. Several sons were saddened by this and went forward to see their father but failed. When they came up and took a closer look, they saw that the creature had a hideous face and was red all over. It was not their father at all. They were very confused and asked the Taoist priest what kind of monster it was. The Taoist priest replied, "This is a red zombie. The most powerful thing is..." After saying that, he directed everyone to carry the body to the wild, set up firewood and burn it to ashes. The body made a chi-chi sound while burning, and the stench did not dissipate for several days. This is why the monster cannot overcome the energy of heaven and earth.